Hey, it's Tyler here. This video is going to be a little bit different because it's not going to be strictly related to tabletop RPGs. Although, of course, you can take ideas from it. There are frequent discussions about this in tabletop RPGs, but not really, usually from a mechanics and gameplay perspective, not from a real world combat perspective. The topic, as you've read the title already, how long do fights last? How long do battles last? This is a question from St. James, who asked historically, how long would a bout between two or more combatants last? Already there's a question because, well, the number of combatants changes it, but whether in battle or single combat, I know the Romans would blow their whistle every X minutes to shift the line, and I know modern warfare is 90% waiting, 8% hurry up, and 2% everyone dying in seconds. But what about the whole space in between? Hey, that's kind of what I specialize in. So, medieval, Bronze Age. Well, Bronze Age isn't actually in between. That's before the Roman period. And I can give you a quick answer on that. And the quick answer on the Bronze Age is we do not know a whole lot about how their fights worked. Um, yeah. Do you know anything about it or have any links to info? Uh, yes, I do know a little bit about it. I do historical European martial arts, as many of you know. And so most of what I can help with is one-on-one combat. I'm also a brown belt in Shorin-ryu karate and a catch wrestling instructor. Do I have any other pedigrees? Not really. I think that's it. But so let's. I'll break it down into so battles. First off, battles can last a greatly different amount depending on how well equipped people are, how great the numbers are. But I think people think about these things already, right? You've got a peasant army that vastly outnumbers their enemy, but they don't have the equipment to deal with plate armor. Then there's not really a whole lot they're going to be able to do. The equipment just isn't good. But if they outnumber them enough, 10 to 1 or so, and it's not just about how many numbers there are, but can they get 10 people fighting a single knight at a time, then yeah, that knight's kind of screwed. Basically, around the time that you start fighting four people at the same time is when your technology and skill stop mattering as much. Assuming your opponents are somewhat capable. They have a bare minimum level of training. Uh, I'll do some, the fun sparring exercises where you take all the new guys to your class and you fight, two, three, four people at a time. Two people at a time, two, people who just know the basics at a time, doable for me as an instructor. Three people is when it starts to get pretty hard. Four people is pretty much impossible. Because you may even kill three people and then get hit by the last guy, and that's it. Um, and the moment you get taken down, if you are in armor, there's stuff you can do while you're on the ground, but it's if you've got three people holding you down or more, then that's pretty much it. Um, More complicated what people don't think about, and I'm going to be using the Battle of Frankenhausen, sometimes called the Massacre at Frankenhausen, uh, the which is in the 1524 German Peasants' War. That's pretty much right in the period that I study, from like the late 1400s to the early 1600s. You see something interesting, which is you have a scouting party on the side of the principalities, the German principalities. They send the scouting party in of light cavalry, and the peasants manage to repel it with a wagon fort. But they realize, well, they've repelled a scouting party. So that scouting party is going back to the main forces and is going to tell them, hey, they're over here. This is how many forces they have. They're set up in a wagon fort, so we shouldn't try to charge them with cavalry because you're not going to get through a solid matter with a horse. So we should just bombard them with artillery from a distance, because by the 1500s, artillery is quite good and wagon forts are pretty outdated. Though they do serve their purpose as getting people on foot and cavalry away from you. So the peasants then retreat up a hill, which is a great strategic decision. It becomes a lot harder to bombard people with late medieval, early Renaissance artillery. When they have high ground, they'll be able to see the approaching forces. But then, probably on the prince's side, but we're not sure, they call a truce so that they can negotiate. While they're negotiating, the negotiations go nowhere, but the prince's forces circle around the hill, cut off the escape route, and basically just totally slaughter all of the peasants. It's something like the princes lose 6 men and the peasants lose 7,000 of their 8,000 men, or something like that. I don't have notes up right now. And I mentioned some great places you can find stuff like this. Scala Gladiatoria has great videos on battles occasionally. Modern History TV has a pretty good channel on it. Lindy Beige will have occasionally good videos on battles, although take some of what he says with a grain of salt. And he makes that pretty obvious. A lot of his stuff is tongue-in-cheek or to get a rise out of people intentionally. But where was I going with that? So that's a battle that lasted really, really quickly. How long the actual fighting lasted? Well, the peasants didn't have any morale. Once they were encircled and trapped inside their town or in their wagon fort, it was pretty much, knights and men-at-arms going in and just slaughtering people that didn't want to fight back. So what started as a battle ended up being a massacre. So if morale is really low, well, that fight's not going to last very long at all. And you have to understand, people generally rout at 2 to 3% losses. And because, they're in these small, tight-knit units of, 10 to 12 people that you travel with everywhere. You'd have a baggage train on the side of the principalities. You have the Landsknecht with their baggage trains, and the baggage trains they're basically a self-sufficient town that moves around, goes everywhere they need to go. So that could last a very long time, yes, because they are self-sufficient. But as soon as one person dies, the other 11 people in the unit go, I don't want to, the morale totally breaks. So I'm working on stopping saying but it's a easy thing to do to fill space. Damn it, I just did it there. Especially from learning French. French made me do that a lot because I had several native French speakers. I don't know if this is a thing in Canadian French, but they said when you're thinking of what to say next to sound more like a native speaker, you shouldn't have empty space. You should fill it with something. There's French people all the time. You listen to French people speaking, aujourd'hui. That's a total digression. Let's bring it back around though. Speaking of the French, the Battle of Crécy, about 130 years earlier. That's a battle that lasted a very long time because both sides were well equipped. The French had a lot of heavy armor. The English had a lot of longbowmen. So we have asymmetry here. Longbows, depending on the strength of the longbow, depending on the arrow, depending on the angle it goes in, depending on the armor that it's hitting, can go through plate armor. But the important thing to note, lots of people don't think about this. How deep into the plate does it actually go? If the arrow was going to go through a foot and absolutely wreck you, now through plate, it might only get a few inches in. And we have this through depictions, usually later. You have a lot of medieval chroniclers going back and asking people who were at the battle, so it's kind of the primary sources pretty much line up with the archaeological digs and the bones that we found, so they're pretty trustworthy. They're saying, the French knights, they're walking around, they're still alive, but they look like hedgehogs because they've got so many arrows sticking out of them. And from the French side, they're saying the arrows were so thick it was like being in a snowstorm, but made of arrows. But arrows are typically pretty bad at killing people. They just do a really good job at maiming people. They do a pretty good job at killing people later on from infection and the like. But immediately, and the History Squad, I'm trying to remember what his name is. I can't remember his name. The History Squad has a lot of great stuff on medieval archery and medicine to treating the wounds. So that's another channel to check out if you're interested in this sort of thing. Because of this, though, these battles would last ages because they can't really kill the knights. The French were... This is a battle that lasted a full day into the hours of the night. The French would basically send out heavy cavalry. They'd send out their light cavalry to go scout at first. They would lose a lot of men because light cavalry does die or get grievously injured by arrows and the like, especially horse-stopping arrows. Realize what the enemy force is like, go, okay, we can send people out in full plate harness and they'll probably stand a decent chance of getting to the front line. They then send out their heavy cavalry and their men-at-arms. They get repelled again because they get stuck in mud. Medieval boots are not great at traveling through mud. Horses especially are not great at traveling through heavy mud. So they get stuck in the mud. They just get rained down on by arrows. They don't die, though. Then they make a slow, agonizing retreat. Then they still haven't lost a lot of their forces, though. So, and the morale is very high. French-English tensions are at an all-time high in the late 1300s. They're fighting over a whole town, Calais and Crécy, multiple towns. So they don't want to stop fighting at 2 or 3% casualties. And these are casualties, not fatalities necessarily. So the French just keep drip-feeding men into the front lines, and the English are doing a really good job of funneling men into their kill zone, which is pretty modern fighting terminology. If you have a sniper or a machine gun nest set up, you want to funnel a bunch of units down a narrow path. That way, instead of having to shoot one person, then aim way over here, shoot that person, then aim way over here, shoot this person, your group of archers or machine gunners or snipers can just focus their fire in a general area and blast some arrows, blast some bullets downrange, and you're probably going to hit somebody because you're not trying to aim at a very particular target. So that's Battlefield, more or less, is that the equipment really matters, the morale really matters, and asymmetry is something to think about. How are they fighting? The battlefield conditions are another thing to think about with the mud and the limited routes of attack. Ranged weapons typically have a very hard time of killing people because if you get shot by an arrow, you can start to retreat, you can raise the shield up, you can lower your visor. There are things you can do. And you may avoid a second volley. If you get stabbed, however, I'm right here. The moment you start to retreat, I'm stabbing you again, and I'm stabbing you again, and I'm stabbing you again. Sigmund of Ringek, one of the treatises, the writers of an armored fighting treatise, he says, now we come to the god's forsaken dagger, or something along those lines. They did not like that sort of fighting in the period because they knew it meant someone's going to die and the other guy is possibly going to get very grievously injured. So, moving on from that, to getting into one-on-one combat, what are things that affect how long that lasts? Again, skill. If you have one person that's way more skilled than the other, they're probably going to win that fight, and it's probably going to be fairly quick. However, something that people don't consider, and something that's written in the treatises, and something you'll hear from Mike Tyson, the people that don't know what the hell they're doing are the hardest people to fight. This is because they often have no sense of self-preservation because they haven't been in a fight before, and they will just think, I just need to kill that guy and then I win. Not thinking, no, I also need to preserve my own life in order to win. So, I'll take my dagger, and as a skilled fighter, I may use Joachim Meyer's principles of provoker, taker, hitter. I'm going to provoke my opponent by being up here, making you think, hey, I'm going to go for this attack. So now I want you to raise your guard over here in order to deflect this attack. I'm provoking, you move over here to deflect, I take the opening, then as you're coming back across your body to deflect this, I now hit the new opening, which is your arm as it's coming across. So I've provoked, I take the opening, I slash across the arm. But what Meyer says is there are moves which hit without taking and take without provoking. Which would be, I don't even do any provocation, I just am this really jittery, like, I don't do any setup, I don't do anything really slick, I'm just trying to stab you immediately. I don't care what you're going to do. I'm effectively fighting as one person, as if your actions don't matter to me. That's something you can do, but it's very risky. It's very, very risky. But you have to understand there are people that do that. So doubles, people killing each other, were very common. You can look at any treatise from this period to see that. The medieval or the early Renaissance period, especially rapier treatises. People are stabbing each other all the time. Meyer even says, you're fighting a guy with a spear and you have a sword. That's pretty crappy. What you can do is if you get stabbed, hit him in the head after you've been stabbed through the stomach. And he says you've got to be quick about it or else it's wasted. Either referring to you're probably going to pass out really quickly, or he's just going to yank the spear out and then retreat. Or you're going to die, so you might as well get one in before it's a wasted effort for you. There's considerations there that a fight would be very, very quick. As quick as spearman goes bip, swordsman goes bip, and in a few seconds it's over. In Meyer's context, however, they are both unarmored. In the context of armored fighting, if the spearman just thrusts straight forward, nothing's going to happen to a heavily armored, plate harness swordsman, or likely even a lesser armored, if they've got brigandine or just a breastplate. Armor functions. It does its job. It's not like in the movies where people just cut straight through armor as if it wasn't there. I'm looking at you, Game of Thrones. But there are obviously things you can do about armor. And there are functional ends to a fight. When the seconds come and pull people off of each other while they're in a fight, that could be an end. So when they get tied up into a grapple, nothing's happening. One of the knights, they clash swords. They realize their swords, they can't find purchase. They can't get into the voiders, into the armpits, into the thighs, into the neck, into the eye slits, what have you. They can't get into there with their swords, so they close up, they tie up, they start wrestling. They try to draw daggers. The other guy sees he's trying to draw his dagger, so he stops him. Now they're just in a wrestling match. You can joint lock someone in plate armor, get them to tap or break an arm. But hey, here's a reality. If you break someone's arm, that might not end the fight. They might still have some fight in them. So the end of the fight there might be that the seconds see that nothing's really happening here in a stalemated grappling match like the first UFC. You can look at Ken Shamrock versus Hoist Gracie to see a sort of stalemated fight between two grapplers there. So grappling changes it. This video is getting kind of long in the tooth. Basically what I'm saying is fighting one-on-one is a huge range. The equipment matters, the skill matters, just like it does in mass combat, but also the particular techniques that someone is using. If someone's a grappler, the fight could last much longer. Or it could last much shorter. If you get on someone's back and you start choking them out, that fight could end in seconds. You're a striker, likewise. The fight could end like Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren, where right out the gate, 7 seconds, flying knee, he's knocked out round 1. That's a fight that ended instantly. These people also knew they were going to fight, and in a judicial duel, in the context I study, these people also know that they were going to get into a fight. So they're both premeditated, they both know that they're fighting. That can extend the length of the fights. If you don't know you're going to be attacked, somebody sneaks up to you and just puts you in a rear naked choke, that's pretty much it. Rear naked choke defense is kind of bullshit. The defense to a rear naked choke is don't get choked in the first place. It's a ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure kind of thing. So, yeah, knowing you're going to be in a fight changes whether or not that fight's going to last a very long time. Grappling changes it because if you do grapple with someone, they can't use their weapons, whether they have an actual weapon like a knife, and they can't move through solid matter, so you're doing a really good job of controlling that hand. And people will say, well, you can really only control one hand at a time. What if they pass it off? In actual knife fights, that doesn't really happen. That only happens whenever the fight is not a fight, but it's like a slow demonstration. And the guy with the training knife or whatever, while the instructor is showing a technique very slowly and carefully, the guy with the knife goes, but what if I do that? And I go 3 times as fast as you. And it's like, okay, well, if you are 3 times as fast as me, yes, that could work. But are you? Right? It's sort of the trifecta of fighting things that matter. The 3 things that go into a fight: psychology, morale, aggression, etc. Physiology, strength, size, cardio, energy, bone density, general health, and skill, technique. Those 3 things can go into really any sport, any physical activity. So, yeah, single combat it varies hugely. You can have fights that last 50 minutes, hours. If it's just 2 people fighting and nobody comes to separate them, if they're both skilled grapplers, that's a fight that could last technically indefinitely. Again, looking at the first UFC and early catch wrestling matches where the rounds were 15 minutes and you were fighting for 3 rounds, sometimes those fights would go on for 45 minutes. Really early boxing matches where they used the light gloves or no gloves and just had their hands wrapped, those fights could go into the hundreds of rounds because there were so many doctor stoppages because they were getting cut up all the time because it's knuckle contact rather than soft padding contact. And also it was almost impossible to knock somebody out because, again, if you know you're going to get into a fight, you're not exposing your chin, you're tilting your chin down, you're covering up. or you're in Old English boxing stance like this, and you're parrying a lot, you're keeping your hands free. Sean Strickland uses this in modern UFC. There's so many considerations. I'm gonna keep rambling on here for another 30 minutes if I don't stop the video soon. Let me know things I missed. I'm gonna keep working on not doing that thing I just did, but it's gonna take me a while, so bear with me. Yeah, let me know your thoughts on that, how that might apply to tabletop RPGs. I know some people have almost an obsession with running combat quickly, Shauner. But I don't really care if it's like a movie or not. I care whether or not it's realistic. I like battles where there's pauses in the battles, and a battle might last, yeah, a day, multiple days. Modern battles can last multiple days, as St. James here mentioned. It's 90% waiting, 8% hurry up. Yeah. So, yep. Hopefully that answered some of your questions. Not a polished video at all, very long and rambly, but there's a ton to talk about. It's a very nuanced, very context based question. So, hopefully that helps. See ya.